Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's comprehensive UPSC Weekly Analysis session. I am delighted to have you all in this virtual classroom as we work through 10 high-priority topics that span the entire UPSC Civil Services examination syllabus. My dear students, what makes today's lecture particularly important is that we are covering the complete spectrum from General Studies Paper 2 to Paper 3, giving you that integrated perspective that UPSC examiners genuinely reward in the final examination. Here is what we will cover in today's extensive session. We begin with the India-UK CETA and Double Contribution Convention, analyzing what the Commerce Secretary has called a gold standard bilateral treaty. Then we examine the Iran-US conflict and the Strait of Hormuz crisis, understanding why this waterway is critical for global energy security. We will explore access to justice, E-Courts Phase 3, and judicial reforms, including the Supreme Court's recent ruling on quasi-judicial bodies. The India-China trade paradox and economic dependence come next, followed by internal security and counter-terrorism pillars in light of the Pahalgam attack. We continue with electoral reforms, voter roll security, and the special intensive revision process. Economic infrastructure and IBC NCLT audits will be covered comprehensively. Public finance, tax policy, and buoyancy are next. The Himalayan disaster management segment addresses the Arunachal Pradesh floods. Finally, we conclude with NEP 2020 and school textbook governance. This is a marathon session, but I promise you that by the end, you will have a complete understanding of these critical topics. Stay with me throughout, and let us begin this intellectual journey together. Topic 1: India-UK CETA and DCC. India-UK CETA and DCC, the dawn of aggressive economic diplomacy. Now, let us begin with a topic that has direct implications for India's trade strategy and service sector competitiveness. On 15th July 2026, a major milestone in bilateral relations was achieved as the long-awaited India-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement and the landmark Double Contribution Convention officially entered into force. This is not just another trade agreement, my dear students. This represents India's most ambitious post-Brexit trade realignment strategy. The primary objective of this agreement is aiming to double bilateral trade by the year 2030. The Commerce Secretary has officially designated this deal as a gold standard bilateral treaty, which fundamentally showcases a new era of aggressive economic diplomacy for India. Think about it. This is the first major trade agreement India has signed with a European nation after Brexit, and it sets a template for future negotiations. For UPSC preparation, this topic maps directly to GS Paper 2 under bilateral agreements involving India and how they affect India's interests, and GS Paper 3 covering the effects of liberalization on the broader economy. The 2x trade target by 2030 is a significant commitment that will be tested through both opportunities and challenges. Let us now examine the specific tariff mechanisms and strategic provisions that make this agreement distinctive. India-UK CETA breakdown. Now, let us understand the specific provisions of this comprehensive economic and trade agreement. The first major element is the 90% plus immediate duty elimination across bilateral tariff lines, which unlocks critical export pathways for Indian businesses. This is significant because tariff elimination of this scale provides direct, unhindered market access. The market access impact is particularly beneficial for specific sectors. Indian exporters of textiles, leather, and gems stand to gain an immediate and substantial competitive advantage in the British consumer market. These are labor-intensive sectors where India has traditional strength, and removing tariff barriers allows Indian products to compete more effectively with other developing country exporters. Beyond goods, The services matrix introduces mutual recognition agreements for certified professionals. This enables Indian lawyers, architects, and accountants to practice under significantly relaxed regulatory environments within the United Kingdom. For India's large pool of qualified professionals, this represents a major opportunity to access global markets without facing recognition barriers. The automobile tariffs establish a structured, phased tariff reduction quota for British luxury cars but crucially protect domestic Indian manufacturers by enforcing strict, high-standard localized production metrics. The FDI provisions secure a stable legal environment for British investment while explicitly preserving India's critical generic medicine flexibilities under the WTO TRIPS architecture, demonstrating that the agreement balances liberalization with protection of public health interests. Double Contribution Convention, DCC. Now, let us examine a particularly innovative component of this bilateral package, the Double Contribution Convention. This is a specialized social security agreement designed to prevent double social security taxation on expatriate professionals. Think about it. Before this convention, Indian IT professionals on short-term UK visas were mandated to contribute 12% to India's EPFO and simultaneously pay national insurance in the UK without ever receiving British retirement benefits. The detachment clause resolution under the new DCC rules provides significant relief. Temporary Indian workers posted for up to 5 years are fully exempt from UK social security contributions, provided they maintain active coverage in India. This is a substantial improvement that addresses a long-standing grievance of Indian service sector workers. The market implications are significant. This convention can deliver 10 to 12% operational project cost savings for Indian IT firms, which directly enhances service sector pricing power in competitive Western markets. For Indian technology companies competing with American and European firms, this cost advantage can be the difference between winning and losing major contracts. For mains preparation, the DCC represents a sophisticated form of economic diplomacy that goes beyond traditional trade agreements to address the practical challenges of service sector exports. You can connect this to broader themes of labor mobility, professional recognition, and the integration of Indian services into global value chains. Evaluating the CETA, strategic opportunities and structural challenges. Now, let us honestly evaluate both the strategic opportunities and structural challenges that this agreement presents. The implementation of CETA presents a complex matrix of macro opportunities for the Indian economy. First, it promises massive labor-intensive growth by acting as a powerful export stimulus for MSME sectors, particularly garments, leather, and artisanal crafts. These are sectors with high employment generation potential, and export expansion can create millions of jobs across the country. Second, the agreement facilitates supply chain integration, plugging Indian electronics assemblies into sophisticated European technology value chains. This represents an opportunity for India to move up the value chain from simple assembly to more sophisticated manufacturing. However, policymakers must navigate severe structural challenges. There are significant trade deficit risks due to a potential surge in high-value machinery and chemical imports from the UK, which could cause a near-term imbalance. Furthermore, there are rules of origin evasion risks, where third-party countries might reroute goods through the UK to exploit zero-tariff entries. Non-tariff barriers remain a hurdle, specifically strict British sanitary and phytosanitary rules that frequently impede Indian agricultural exports. For mains, you can frame this as a classic trade agreement evaluation, weighing the benefits of market access against the risks of import surges and the challenges of compliance. The way forward involves strategic policy recommendations to maximize benefits while mitigating risks. Bilateral way forward. To maximize the utility of the India-UK CETA, India must adopt a forward-looking, multi-pronged policy approach. The first strategic priority is export basket diversification. Indian industries must move beyond basic raw materials and low-margin textiles, pivoting into high-value sectors like specialized electronics, pharmaceuticals, and space tech services. This transition is essential for capturing maximum value from the market access provided by CETA. The second priority is developing robust compliance infrastructure. The government must construct state-backed testing laboratories inside India to ensure that agricultural and industrial products comply seamlessly with UK standards before shipping. This proactive approach neutralizes non-tariff barriers by ensuring Indian products meet British requirements from the production stage, rather than being rejected at the destination. Lastly, India must maintain a strategic bilateral focus, actively leveraging the unique institutional mechanisms created under CETA to resolve long-standing visa friction points and foster essential clean energy technology transfers for future sustainability. The agreement creates ongoing dialogue mechanisms that can be used to address practical implementation issues as they arise. For your mains preparation, this three-pronged approach demonstrates the kind of policy sophistication that UPSC rewards. The CETA is not just a trade document, but a framework for ongoing bilateral cooperation that requires active management to realize its full potential. UPSC Focus, India-UK Prelims Pointers and Mains Framework. Now, let us consolidate this topic with high-yield prelims pointers that you must master. First, understand the definitive differences between a free trade agreement, a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, and a comprehensive economic and trade agreement. These three terms are often used interchangeably in casual discussion, but they have distinct legal meanings and coverage scopes. An FTA typically covers goods, a CEPA includes services and investment, and a CETA specifically refers to goods-focused comprehensive agreements. Second, master the concept of rules of origin and specifically the product-specific rules mechanism. This is crucial because RU determines whether a product qualifies for preferential tariffs and PSR specifies the exact production criteria that must be met. Third, review the statutory role and mandate of the Directorate General of Trade Remedies in international trade disputes. The DGTR handles anti-dumping, countervailing duties, and safeguard measures. For mains, a model question asks you to critically examine the structural benefits and systemic challenges of this treaty for India's service-driven economy. The answer framework should include an introduction referencing the CETA's entry into force and the 2030 doubling target. A first body paragraph analyzing strategic opportunities in services and manufacturing, a second body paragraph addressing structural challenges, including trade deficit risks and non-tariff barriers, and a conclusion proposing policy measures to maximize benefits. Topic 2. Iran-US conflict and Strait of Hormuz. Iran-US conflict and Strait of Hormuz. Now, let us transition to a topic with direct implications for India's energy security and macroeconomic stability. The Iran-US conflict and the Strait of Hormuz crisis represent one of the most significant geopolitical flashpoints affecting global energy markets. The fragile West Asia ceasefire has collapsed completely following significant tit-for-tat kinetic strikes between US forces and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The retaliation cycle escalated dramatically when, following US strikes on Iranian surveillance outposts, Iran launched extensive drone salvos targeting the strategic assets of the US Fifth Fleet stationed in Bahrain and Kuwait. In response, Washington has formally reimposed a strict maritime containment blockade in the Persian Gulf. This rapid escalation raises severe global fears of a prolonged choke point shutdown in one of the world's most critical maritime corridors. The Strait of Hormuz choke point is critical for global energy transit stability. As one of the world's most critical maritime corridors, any prolonged disruption to the strait threatens global energy security. For UPSC preparation, this topic maps to GS Paper 2, covering the effect of politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests, and GS Paper 3, covering energy security, maritime security, and economic vulnerability. This is a high-yield topic for mains that tests your ability to connect geopolitics with economic outcomes. Strait of Hormuz, Geographical and Strategic Study. Let us understand the geographic and strategic significance of this critical waterway. The Strait of Hormuz is a highly sensitive geographic choke point connecting the oil-rich Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the wider Arabian Sea. It is flanked by Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south. The narrowest choke point width is only 39 kilometers, making it extremely narrow dimensions that dictate severe tactical vulnerability and heighten geographic sensitivity. The commercial shipping lanes consist of dual 2-mile inbound and outbound transit channels, split by a 2-mile central safety buffer. These narrow dimensions mean that even a single incident can effectively block all commercial traffic. The macroeconomic significance is staggering. The strait handles 21% of global petroleum flow as daily global oil transit, serving as the absolute lifeline for Qatar's global LNG supply lines. Any disruption along this narrow passage risks a swift global energy crisis. For prelims, remember the 39 kilometers narrowest width, the 2+2-mile shipping lane configuration, and the 21% global petroleum flow share. These numbers make the strategic importance absolutely clear. Iran-US-Israel geopolitics and unclosed legal ambiguity. Now, let us examine the legal and geopolitical dimensions of this crisis. The Trump doctrine maintains a maximum containment posture, explicitly threatening severe, non-traditional infrastructure strikes against mainland Iran if maritime disruptions persist in the Gulf. This represents a significant escalation in the US approach to Iran, moving beyond traditional sanctions to threats of direct military action. The proxy network matrix shows that regional state fragmentation across Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen provides asymmetrical levers for cross-border disruptions. This means that even if direct conflict is avoided, proxy forces can create instability across multiple fronts. A critical legal dimension is the unclosed gray zone. Transit through the strait is legally protected under the transit passage rules of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. However, a permanent international law gray zone exists because Iran has signed but never ratified the UNCLOS treaty, allowing them to contest the legal protections of foreign military and commercial vessels navigating their territorial waters. This legal ambiguity creates significant uncertainty for commercial shipping and naval operations. For mains, you can use this legal dimension to discuss how international law functions in practice even when not universally ratified and how states use legal ambiguity as a strategic tool. Geopolitical and macroeconomic impact on India. Let us now examine how this crisis directly impacts India across multiple dimensions. A blockade in the Strait of Hormuz triggers profound macroeconomic vulnerabilities for India through multiple transmission channels. First, the macroeconomic impact channel. Spikes in international crude oil prices immediately balloon India's current account deficit and violently fuel domestic core inflation, impacting key developmental indices. When crude prices rise, India spends more foreign exchange on imports, weakening the rupee and creating imported inflation across the economy. Second, the diaspora and security channel. Over 8.5 million non-resident Indians reside across the GCC zone. Any expansion of total kinetic war threatens massive, high-risk emergency repatriation logistics. Simultaneously, the Ministry of Shipping has initiated real-time tracking systems for thousands of Indian seafarers navigating the high-risk Persian Gulf. The human stakes of this crisis are enormous. Third, the Strategic Transit Choke Channel. Reimposed international sanctions act as an institutional asset choking mechanism in the region. This directly stalls India's long-term infrastructure connectivity strategy, restricting critical progress via the Chabhar port and the international north-south transport corridor. For mains, these three channels demonstrate how a regional conflict can have cascading impacts on a distant economy. The 8.5 million diaspora figure is particularly powerful for mains answers on diaspora welfare and strategic responsibilities. India's policy response and long-term energy mitigation pathway. Now, let us examine India's policy response to this crisis. Immediately, India must focus on operationalizing Phase 2 of the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. This requires rapidly accelerating underground SPR construction at Padur and Chandikhol to expand the crude buffer beyond the current precarious 9.5 days. The 9.5 days figure is critical because it represents a vulnerability that could be exploited during a prolonged blockade. Simultaneously, India must execute a geographic sourcing realignment. This involves proactively scaling up term contracts with non-West Asian suppliers, focusing heavily on expanding supply flows from Russia, Latin America, and West Africa. This diversification strategy reduces dependence on any single region and creates resilience against regional disruptions. Ultimately, this crisis mandates an energy transition acceleration. Policymakers must use this geopolitical pressure to double down on internal green hydrogen production, enforce mandatory ethanol blending targets, and aggressively fund EV public transportation transitions. The long-term answer to import dependence is reducing the need for imports through domestic clean energy production. For mains, this three-pronged response, immediate SPR expansion, medium-term geographic diversification, and long-term energy transition, demonstrates a sophisticated policy framework that addresses both immediate vulnerabilities and structural dependencies. UPSC Focus Framework, Strait of Hormuz. Let us consolidate this topic with high-yield prelims pointers. First, detailed map locations identify the exact positioning of the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and Abu Musa Island. UPSC frequently tests map-based knowledge, so ensure you can locate these features on a blank map. Second, understand the operational mandate and strategic objectives of Operation Sankalp launched by the Indian Navy. This operation represents India's naval deployment to protect Indian shipping in the Gulf region and demonstrates our defensive posture. Third, clearly define the legal difference between innocent passage and transit passage under the UNCLOS framework. Innocent passage applies to territorial seas and allows passage that is not prejudicial to peace, while transit passage applies to international straits and allows continuous and expeditious transit without the innocent passage restrictions. For mains, a model question asks you to assess India's strategic options to insulate its macroeconomic architecture from West Asian choke point politics. The answer should reference the 9.5-day SPR buffer, the 8.5 million diaspora, and the 21% global petroleum flow through Hormuz to establish stakes, then evaluate diversification, energy transition, and naval deployment as strategic options. Now, if you are watching this session and finding value in the structured analysis, do take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Daily lectures like this one are designed to give you that competitive edge in your preparation. Topic 3. Access to Justice and Judicial Reforms. Access to Justice and Judicial Reforms. Now, let us transition to a topic that touches the lives of every citizen seeking justice. In a vital human rights ruling, The Supreme Court of India recently declared that all quasi-judicial bodies determining citizenship status must strictly adhere to a fair, reasoned, and transparent procedure. This is a landmark ruling that addresses long-standing concerns about arbitrary decisions affecting fundamental rights. The court's reasoning, articulated by Justices Vikram Nath and Sandeep Mehta, states that because a declaration of being a foreigner permanently strips away structural civil rights, summary or unreasoned orders are a direct violation of natural justice. This principle applies broadly to any quasi-judicial body making decisions that affect fundamental rights, not just citizenship tribunals. The core focus area is GS Paper 2, directly impacting the structure, organization, and functioning of the judiciary, as well as the implementation of crucial welfare schemes for historically vulnerable sections. The constitutional grounding of this judicial mandate is anchored in Article 21 covering the right to life and liberty and DPSP Article 39 covering equal justice and free legal aid. Both these provisions emphasize that justice must be accessible, fair, and meaningful. For your understanding, think about what this means in practice. If a tribunal declares someone a foreigner without giving reasons, that person loses fundamental rights, including the right to live in India. The Supreme Court has now said that such decisions must be reasoned and fair, which is a significant protection for vulnerable populations. Structural overview of Indian judiciary. Let us understand the structural organization of the Indian justice system. The Indian justice system operates on an integrated structure, a unified, hierarchical judicial system featuring the Supreme Court at the apex, individual high courts at the state level, and the district subordinate courts at the base. This integrated hierarchy ensures consistency in legal interpretation and procedural standards across the country. Operating alongside this is a quasi-judicial parallel system. These are specialized administrative tribunals, such as Foreigners' Tribunals under the Foreigners' Tribunal Order 1964, designed specifically to expedite sensitive, highly technical cases out of standard, overburdened court rosters. The logic is that specialized expertise can handle certain case types more efficiently. However, the Supreme Court has firmly established a judicial review shield. The Apex Court reaffirmed that absolutely no administrative tribunal can operate completely immune from the constitutional oversight and writ jurisdictions of high courts under Article 226 and the Supreme Court under Article 32. This means that even quasi-judicial bodies are subject to constitutional supervision, ensuring that fundamental rights are protected. For prelims, remember the three tiers of the integrated judiciary: the Supreme Court, High Courts, and District Subordinate Courts. Also remember Articles 32 and 226 as the writ jurisdictions that allow individuals to approach higher courts for fundamental rights protection. The Foreigners' Tribunal Order 1964 is a key statute for understanding quasi-judicial bodies in India. E-Courts Mission Mode, Phase 3. Now, let us examine the digital transformation of the Indian judiciary. The E-Courts Mission Mode Phase 3 represents a monumental shift toward a digital public good paradigm. It marks a clean, definitive break from simple electronic filing systems to build an open-source, cloud-native, and AI-integrated judicial data infrastructure. The first component is the Judicial Core, which establishes an open-source, cloud-native core that integrates advanced AI capabilities to manage judicial workflows. This transitions the system from static filing into a dynamic data model, enabling better case management and resource allocation. The second component is interoperable ICJS, which integrates secure, live data networks across courts, police, forensic labs, and prisons. This ensures instantaneous, tamper-proof judicial document transfers nationwide, reducing delays and improving coordination between different agencies in the justice system. The third component is virtual courtrooms, which eradicate geographical barriers for rural and marginalized citizens. Remote legal appearances dramatically lower the absolute cost of representation, democratizing access to legal services. For mains, Phase 3 represents the future of judicial administration in India. You can connect this to broader themes of digital India, access to justice, and the use of technology for governance. The open source nature is particularly important, as it represents a public good approach rather than vendor lock-in. Judicial administration and pendency. Now, let us confront the harsh reality of judicial pendency. Despite digital advancements, the Indian judiciary faces severe administrative crisis. Cumulative case pendency has breached the critical 50 million threshold, causing extensive, systemic delays in basic commercial and criminal justice delivery. This 50 million figure represents a massive denial of timely justice to millions of citizens. The structural deficits contributing to this crisis are significant. First, appointment deficits. Structural delays in judges' selection via the executive collegium system leave lower court benches facing up to a 30% structural vacancy rate. This means even the sanctioned judicial positions remain unfilled, directly reducing adjudication capacity. Second, infrastructure gaps. Basic lower courts frequently lack specialized digital evidence rooms, vulnerable witness translation centers, and basic sanitation facilities. These deficiencies affect both the quality and speed of justice delivery. Additionally, 77% of prison inmates are under trials, meaning they have not been convicted but are awaiting trial, often for years. This massive under-trial population represents a humanitarian crisis and a symptom of the broader pendency problem in the criminal justice system. For mains, the 50 million pending cases and 77% under-trial population are powerful statistics that demonstrate the scale of the crisis. The 30% vacancy rate explains why the system cannot cope with existing caseloads. These numbers are essential for any answer on judicial reforms. Systemic way forward reforms, AI integration and AIJS implementation. Resolving the judicial crisis requires aggressive, systemic reforms. First, a strict AI integration policy must be deployed. The judiciary must implement advanced tools like Suvas, judicial translation software, and Supace, AI case file data miners, strictly to automate routine administrative functions and exponentially speed up file processing. These technologies can handle translation and case data analysis, freeing judges to focus on substantive legal reasoning. Second, the government must focus on establishing the AIJS, or All India Judicial Service. Actively enforcing Article 312 to create an All India Judicial Service will ensure a standardized, meritocratic, and highly diversified national intake for lower court judges, addressing the vacancy crisis. This is similar to how the IS and IPS work for the executive, providing a merit-based recruitment mechanism for the judiciary. Third, the system must scale alternative dispute resolution. This requires institutionalizing mandatory pre-litigation mediation, expanding online lok adalats, and strategically limiting the state government's role as an unchecked, routine litigant. ADR mechanisms can resolve many disputes without burdening the formal court system. For mains, you can frame this three-pronged approach as technology, manpower, and system burden reduction. The AIJS under Article 312 is a particularly important reform that UPSC frequently references as a pending reform that could transform judicial recruitment. UPSC focus, constitutional provisions, and mains framework. Let us consolidate this topic with high-yield prelims pointers. Thoroughly revise core constitutional provisions regarding the judiciary, Article 39 on equal justice and free legal aid, Article 226 on High Court writ jurisdiction, Article 32 on Supreme Court writ jurisdiction, Article 142 on complete justice, and Article 312 on All India Judicial Service. These articles are foundational for any polity question. Understand the statutory structure, mandate, and funding mechanisms of the National Legal Services Authority, NLSA, which was established under the Legal Services Authorities Act 1987 to provide free legal aid to the poor and weaker sections. Review the specific recommendations made by the Malimat Committee and the Justice J.S. Verma Committee on Criminal Justice Reforms, as these are frequently referenced in mains answers. For mains, a model question asks you to evaluate the potential of E-Courts Phase 3 in transforming India's judicial landscape. The answer should include an introduction defining the project and the 50 million pendency crisis, a first body paragraph detailing the three core components of Phase 3, a second body paragraph addressing systemic challenges including vacancies and infrastructure gaps, and a conclusion emphasizing the constitutional mandate of accessible justice under Article 21 and 39A. Topic 4. India-China Trade Relations. India-China Trade Relations, the Economic Paradox. Now, let us examine a topic that reveals the complex contradictions in India's economic relationship with China. India is currently navigating a profound economic paradox. Fresh quarterly trade updates reveal that despite intense border standoffs and strict political de-risking policies, India's industrial reliance on Chinese component inputs continues to break historical records. Simultaneously, India has initiated a severe trade interdiction to enforce global ethical supply chains. The state has officially prohibited the import of all foreign goods manufactured using verified forced labor networks. This shows the intense strategic friction between geopolitical pushbacks and the unavoidable ground-level manufacturing requirements of domestic industry. The core GS Paper 3 implication is for the Indian economy and supply chain security. This topic tests your understanding of how political tensions and economic realities coexist in a globalized world. Why is this important? Because India's stated policy is to reduce dependence on China, yet our actual trade data shows increasing reliance. This paradox needs nuanced analysis. India-China Trade Profile analyzing the systemic deficit model. Let us analyze the structural realities of this trade relationship. The bilateral trade profile is defined by harsh asymmetric trade realities. India's exports to China remain largely confined to low-margin raw materials such as raw iron ore, cotton, and marine items. Conversely, imports from China are overwhelmingly dominated by high-value, processed industrial inputs, creating a systemic deficit. This structural dependence creates critical sector choking points across vital Indian industries. The pharmaceuticals sector shows extreme structural reliance on China for a staggering 68% of vital active pharmaceutical ingredients. This means most of the raw materials for Indian generic medicines come from China, creating vulnerability in our healthcare supply chain. The National Solar Mission is similarly exposed, with over 75% of solar cells, ingots, and wafers powering India's green energy targets imported directly from Chinese vendors. This creates a paradox where our clean energy transition depends on the very country we are trying to decouple from. The electronics sector also faces exposure, with advanced printed circuit board assemblies and telecom nodes heavily dependent on Chinese imports. The 68% API dependency and 75% solar component dependency are powerful statistics for mains answers on supply chain security. Rare earth dominance and strategic risks. The rare earth dimension is particularly concerning. China exercises a dangerous processing monopoly, controlling over 85% of global processing and refining capabilities for rare earth elements like neodymium and dysprosium. These materials are critical for permanent magnets used in electric vehicles, wind turbines, and defense applications. India holds localized deposits of monazite sands but currently lacks advanced refining setups. India's ambitious clean transportation targets face a major structural roadblock. Domestic battery packs rely entirely on imported, processed Chinese lithium-ion cells. This dependence on Chinese battery technology undermines the entire EV value chain. Additionally, there is the weaponization of trade to consider. Sub-threshold economic statecraft, such as targeted delays in customs clearances for critical raw chemical materials by overseas ports, presents a permanent, systemic risk to domestic factory production lines and overall economic stability. For mains, the 85% rare earth processing monopoly is a powerful statistic. The weaponization of trade through subtle administrative actions is a sophisticated form of economic coercion that is difficult to address through traditional trade remedies. This is what makes supply chain security so complex in the contemporary world. Strategic Indian initiatives. Now, let us examine India's response to these challenges. The cornerstone of India's industrial push is the production-linked incentive scheme with a 1.97 lakh crore rupee allocation across 14 vital manufacturing sectors, designed to foster import substitution and scale up localized factory floors. This represents one of the largest industrial policy investments in India's history. Additionally, the state funds bulk drug parks to establish API clusters, aiming to break pharmaceutical input dependency. This addresses the 68% API import dependence by creating domestic manufacturing capacity for critical pharmaceutical inputs. On the regulatory front, the government has implemented strict border restrictions via the General Financial Rules Amendment. Rule 144(11) strictly bars companies from countries sharing a land border with India from bidding on public procurement contracts without prior security clearances. This rule directly targets Chinese companies and creates a protected market for Indian manufacturers. Quality control orders act as non-tariff barriers designed to protect the domestic manufacturing ecosystem, specifically targeting low-grade toy, steel, and chemical imports, blocking low-cost foreign dumping from destabilizing localized factory floors. For prelims, remember the 1.97 lakh crore PLI allocation, the 14 sectors covered, and Rule 144(11) of the GFR. These are specific policy instruments that UPSC tests in prelim questions. UPSC Policy Brief Future Strategy. Now, let us look ahead to the future strategy that India must pursue to address the structural challenges we have discussed. This requires a comprehensive approach across three critical dimensions. First, geopolitical trade realignment. We must aggressively operationalize alternative manufacturing clusters in Southeast Asia, including Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, and institutionalize comprehensive trade pacts with the European Union. This China Plus One strategy is not merely about diversifying suppliers, but about building genuinely independent production ecosystems that can serve global markets without depending on Chinese inputs or transshipment routes. Second, robust mineral diplomacy. We must expand the operational mandates of KABIL, which stands for Khanij Bidesh India Limited, the government company tasked with acquiring critical mineral assets overseas. The goal is to secure direct ownership of lithium and cobalt mines across Australia, Argentina, and Chile. Think about it, if India owns mines in these resource-rich countries, we bypass the Chinese processing monopoly entirely. Direct mine ownership is fundamentally different from long-term contracts because it gives India control over the resource flow from extraction to processing. Third, domestic value chain transition. We must shift industrial policy from simple assembly and packaging to high-end component design, precision engineering, and massive internal research and development funding. The PLI scheme should be seen as a stepping stone to genuine technology development rather than just manufacturing scale. Assembly operations can be relocated overnight by any government. Design capabilities and patent portfolios represent genuine competitive advantages that cannot be easily replicated or taken away. For your mains preparation, frame this as a three-dimensional strategy addressing geographical diversification, resource security, and capability building. The shift from assembly to design represents the key to moving up the global value chain and achieving genuine strategic autonomy in critical technologies. This is not just about economic policy, it is about national security in an era where economic statecraft has become a primary tool of geopolitical competition. Let us now move to consolidate this entire India-China trade topic with specific UPSC examination preparation guidance. UPSC Focus, Trade Defense Mechanisms and Mains Framework ***. Now, let us consolidate the India-China trade topic with high-yield prelims pointers that you must master for examination success. First, the DGTR mandate. Review the statutory functions and investigative powers of the Directorate General of Trade Remedies. The DGTR is the government body that handles anti-dumping investigations, countervailing duty proceedings, and safeguard measures. Understanding the distinction between these three types of trade remedies is essential because UPSC frequently tests whether you know the specific conditions under which each remedy applies. Second, science and technology focus. Understand what rare earth elements are, why they are chemically unique, and what their industrial applications include. Rare earths are not actually rare in terms of crustal abundance, but their dispersion and the complexity of separating them make processing economically challenging. China dominates this processing, which is the critical choke point. Industrial applications include permanent magnets for EV motors and wind turbines, phosphors for displays, and various defense applications. Third, trade defense metrics. Understand the strict economic and legal differences between anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties, also known as CVD. Anti-dumping duties address situations where foreign producers sell below normal value to gain market share. Countervailing duties address foreign subsidies that distort competition. Both are legitimate trade defense instruments under WTO rules, but they have different legal standards and procedural requirements. For mains, a model question asks you to critically evaluate the efficacy of the production-linked incentive scheme in reducing India's structural import dependence on China. The answer framework should begin with an introduction defining weaponized economic interdependence and referencing the 68% API dependency and 85% rare earth processing monopoly. The first body paragraph should detail the PLI scheme's objectives and coverage across 14 sectors while evaluating its achievements and limitations. The second body paragraph should address the structural challenges that PLI alone cannot solve, including rare earth processing gaps and the technology divide. The conclusion should advocate for a comprehensive strategy combining PLI, mineral diplomacy through Kabul, and domestic R&D investment to build genuine supply chain resilience. This analytical structure will help you craft high-scoring mains answers that demonstrate both factual knowledge and strategic thinking, exactly what the UPSC examination expects from successful candidates. Let us now transition to our next major topic on internal security and counter-terrorism. Topic 5: Internal Security and Counter-Terrorism. Pahalgam Attack and Syndicate Crackdown. Now, let us address a critical internal security topic. The internal security matrix recently faced a severe test following a complex terror attack in Pahalgam. Due to suspected overseas linkages, the investigation was immediately handed over to the National Investigation Agency. This represents the standard protocol for terror cases with cross-border dimensions. The subsequent syndicate crackdown utilized advanced cyber forensics and real-time electronic intelligence fusion, allowing the NIA to expose a highly distributed, cross-border sleeper cell operation spanning multiple Indian states. A critical discovery during massive multi-state raids was the funding vector. Operatives heavily utilized encrypted dark web spaces and decentralized digital tokens to finance localized tactical terror strikes. This event holds core relevance for GS Paper 3, specifically regarding the linkages of organized crime with terrorism, the connections between development and the spread of extremism, and the role of security forces and agencies. For mains, the use of the dark web and cryptocurrency for terror financing is a contemporary dimension that demonstrates the evolving nature of security threats. NIA Act 2008 and concurrent jurisdiction. The National Investigation Agency was established under the NIA Act 2008, acting as a singular, apex central counter-terrorism agency. Its formulation was a direct legislative response in the immediate political wake of the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, which exposed the need for a dedicated federal agency to handle complex terror cases. A defining feature of the NIA is its federal supremacy rule, powered by a unique statutory concurrent jurisdiction. This empowers the NIA to independently take over the investigation of scheduled offences across any Indian state without seeking explicit permission or consent from the state government. This is a critical feature because it prevents state-level political interference from obstructing terror investigations. The 2019 legislative amendment significantly widened the agency's operational reach. The NIA is now explicitly empowered to investigate complex transnational crimes, including human trafficking, counterfeit currency manufacturing, cyber-terrorism, and attacks on Indian assets and installations abroad. This expansion reflects the evolving nature of security threats that extend beyond traditional terrorism. For prelims, remember the NIA Act 2008 and the 2019 amendment. The concurrent jurisdiction that allows NIA to operate without state consent is a critical feature that distinguishes it from regular central agencies. The post-2611 origin is essential context for understanding the agency. Evolution of contemporary terror. The contemporary terror threat matrix has witnessed a strategic shift toward hybrid actors. There is a marked transition away from large, organized, easily trackable militant commands towards hybrid terrorists or lone actor cells who live ordinary civilian lives until activated for specific strikes. This evolution makes detection significantly harder. This is fueled by sophisticated cyber radicalization pipelines, characterized by the heavy deployment of encrypted gaming platforms, closed-loop messaging networks, and virtual private networks by overseas handlers to radicalize vulnerable youth without any physical meetings. The absence of physical meetings makes traditional intelligence gathering much less effective. Additionally, there is a dangerous organized crime convergence. Authorities note a direct commercial alignment between cross-border narcotics cartels operating via the Golden Crescent, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and internal terror networks, designed to generate self-sustaining operational capital. This narcoterror nexus creates a self-financing terror ecosystem that is difficult to disrupt. For mains, the shift from structured organizations to hybrid actors represents a fundamental challenge to conventional counterinsurgency doctrines. The cyber radicalization dimension is particularly concerning because it operates across borders without physical presence, making it difficult to track and counter using traditional methods. India's counter-terrorism pillars. India's counter-terrorism architecture rests on three critical pillars. Pillar 1 is the UAPA 1967, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which serves as the primary statutory counterinsurgency shield. A critical 2019 amendment grants the central government the power to designate specific individuals as terrorists, effectively preventing terror groups from evading sanctions by simply rebranding under new names. Individual designation is a powerful tool that targets specific operatives regardless of organizational affiliation. Pillar 2 is the Multi-Agency Center, MAC, which functions as the 24/7 National Intelligence Fusion Center under the Intelligence Bureau, where central intelligence agencies, armed forces, and state police units share real-time tactical updates. The MAC addresses the traditional problem of intelligence silos that hampered counter-terrorism coordination. Pillar 3 is NatGrid, a unified IT infrastructure designed to securely interlink standalone databases such as banking, immigration, passport, telecom, and transport records to proactively flag suspicious behavioral patterns. NatGrid enables pattern recognition across multiple data sources that individual agencies cannot achieve alone. For prelims, remember these 3 pillars and their functions. The UAPA 2019 Amendment on Individual Designation is particularly important as it represents a significant expansion of counter-terrorism legal tools. MAC operates under IB, and NatGrid links multiple databases. Way forward: building internal capacities. Modernizing digital forensics is the first reform pathway. The state must invest heavily in upgrading the NIA's capabilities in open-source intelligence, OSINT, hardware decryption tools, and deep-tech cryptocurrency tracking algorithms. These technologies are essential for investigating modern terror cases that use encrypted communications and cryptocurrency financing. Standardizing state ATS capacities is the second priority. Strengthening the baseline capabilities of individual state police anti-terrorism squads is necessary to create a seamless first line of defense nationwide. State ATS units are often the first responders, and their capabilities determine initial response effectiveness. Comprehensive border management requires the deployment of smart border management fences, automated ground sensors, drone-based aerial surveillance platforms, and significantly strengthened intelligence coordination with local border communities. Technology-enabled border management is essential for preventing infiltration and cross-border movement of terrorists. For mains, these reform pathways demonstrate a comprehensive approach to building counter-terrorism capacity. You can connect them to broader themes of internal security, technology adoption, and federal coordination in security matters. UPSC focus, NIA statutory schedules, and hybrid terrorism evolution. Let us consolidate this topic with key exam takeaways. High-yield prelims pointers include the statutory schedule of the NIA Act, which is the specific list of laws the NIA is authorized to handle the structural mechanism of the Financial Action Task Force Grey and Black lists, which designate countries with deficient anti-money laundering and counter-terror financing frameworks. And the legal absolute bail provisions under Section 43d(5) of the UAPA, which restricts bail in terror cases. For mains, a model question asks you to evaluate the statutory and operational performance of the NIA in countering the asymmetric threat of decentralized, technology-driven hybrid networks. The answer should include an introduction referencing the Pahalgam attack and the shift to hybrid terrorism, a first body paragraph detailing the NIA Act 2008 framework and concurrent jurisdiction, a second body paragraph analyzing the evolution of terror threats, including cyber radicalization and narco-terror convergence, and a conclusion assessing the NIA's effectiveness and suggesting capacity-building measures. Topic 6. Electoral Reforms. Special Intensive Revision, Sir. Now, let us transition to an important topic on electoral governance. The Special Intensive Revision was initiated by the ECI to rigorously purify the national voter database, eliminate duplicate profiles, and guarantee that no eligible citizen faces arbitrary disenfranchisement. This is a critical exercise in maintaining the integrity of our democratic processes. Major political parties have formally petitioned the Election Commission of India for an extension of the SIR deadlines across multiple states, reflecting the operational complexity of conducting intensive verification across a country of 1.4 billion people. An accurate, inclusive, and fully audited electoral roll forms the absolute foundational requirement for clean public democratic representation. For UPSC preparation, this topic maps to GS paper 2 under salient features of the Representation of the People Act and the functioning of statutory bodies like the Election Commission. This is a high-frequency topic that tests your understanding of electoral democracy fundamentals. The Electoral Revision Architecture. The electoral revision process follows a structured methodology. Summary revision is conducted annually and relies heavily on citizens voluntarily submitting forms to update details or add new 18-year-old voters. This is a continuous process that allows ongoing corrections. Intensive revision is deployed periodically or before major elections. It involves rigorous door-to-door physical audits by state personnel, ensuring comprehensive verification of voter information rather than relying solely on self-reporting. The Special Intensive Revision acts as a robust hybrid administrative framework designed for targeted validation. It strategically combines automated data deduplication with physical, on-the-ground validation in designated higher zones, providing both technological efficiency and human verification. Revisions execute through a strict, tiered organizational hierarchy. The CEO provides strategic guidance at the state level, DOs execute regionally, ROs manage directly, and BLOs perform physical validation at the booth level. The booth-level officer, often a school teacher, is the critical grassroots functionary in this chain. For prelims, remember the three types of revision: summary, annual, voluntary, intensive, periodic, door-to-door, and special intensive, hybrid, targeted. The four-tier administrative hierarchy of CEO, DO, ERO, and BLO is essential for understanding electoral administration. Constitutional and statutory pillars. The framework governing Indian elections is anchored in the Constitution through Articles 324 to 326. Article 324 grants complete plenipotentiary powers of superintendence, direction, and control of all Indian elections exclusively to the Independent Election Commission of India. This is a unique constitutional provision that gives the ECI comprehensive authority over the entire electoral process. Article 325 mandates a single universal electoral roll for every constituency and strictly bars any discrimination or exclusion based on religion, race, caste, or sex. This non-discrimination principle is fundamental to universal suffrage. Article 326 enshrines universal adult suffrage, guaranteeing the fundamental democratic right to vote to every citizen over 18 who is not otherwise disqualified by law. This is the constitutional foundation of democratic participation. Constitutional mandates are supported by statutory pillars. The Representation of the People Act 1950 formulates critical legal rules and structures to manage preparatory logistics before actual voting begins, including seat allocation, boundary delimitation, and roll compilation. The Representation of the People Act 1951 serves as the functional codebook detailing actual administrative and operational guidelines, including conduct of elections, candidate qualifications, and dispute resolutions. For prelims, remember Article 324, ECI powers, Article 325, single universal roll, non-discrimination, Article 326, universal adult suffrage, RPA 1950, preparation, RPA 1951, conduct. These are foundational for polity questions. Challenges in electoral roll purity. Now, let us address the challenges. Governing the electoral roll involves navigating significant strategic challenges that threaten the democratic mandate. First, exclusion versus inclusion errors. Hasty administrative cleanups delete vulnerable, uneducated, low-income, or marginalized voters without due process. Conversely, registers remain plagued by diseased entries, multi-residence duplication, and fake address subversions. Second, the migration vector. Rapid, seasonal circular migration across Indian states complicates governance. The static, residence-based registration framework fails to accurately track highly mobile citizens, creating both inclusion and exclusion problems. Third, grassroots capacity deficits. Overburdened booth-level officers, typically local school teachers or administrative clerks, are stretched extremely thin by overlapping duties during critically short revision windows. For mains, these challenges represent the practical implementation difficulties in maintaining clean electoral rolls in a diverse and mobile democracy. You can frame the exclusion of vulnerable voters as a fundamental rights concern under Article 326. Way forward: securing voter rolls. To build inclusive and dynamic voter registries, the system must transition to continuous revision. The National Voter Registry should evolve away from periodic revision exercises towards a real-time, dynamic database safely linked with national birth and death registries. This would enable automatic addition of new eligible voters and removal of deceased persons. To prevent disenfranchisement, strict deletion audits are necessary. The ECI must enforce a zero-exception administrative rule mandating written notifications and verified field double-checks before any name can be deleted from the active registry. This protects against arbitrary deletion of genuine voters. Finally, leveraging digital public goods integration is essential. Utilizing secure citizen self-service portals and open-source geospatial mapping tools will empower local communities to easily audit their own neighborhood booth listings. Citizen participation in verification strengthens the system's accuracy and democratic legitimacy. For mains, this three-pronged approach demonstrates how technology and administrative reform can address the challenges of electoral roll management. The continuous revision concept connects to broader themes of digital India and governance modernization. UPSC Exam Focus, Indian Polity, GS2. Let us consolidate the electoral reforms topic with high-yield prelims pointers. First, RPA 1950 voter disqualification. Core statutory grounds explicitly mandate exclusion based on non-residence, unsoundness of mind, crime, or corrupt or illegal practices. Second, Article 325 versus Article 326. Article 325 strictly bars exclusion from the electoral roll based on religion, race, caste, or sex, while Article 326 constitutionally defines universal adult suffrage. Third, the 61st Constitutional Amendment Act of 1988 enacted the historical reduction of India's voting age from 21 to 18 to enhance youth participation in political processes. This is a frequently tested fact. For mains, a model question asks you to discuss the institutional and technological challenges the Election Commission faces in purifying voter rolls amid high domestic migration. The answer should include an introduction defining democratic legitimacy and the SIR framework, a first body paragraph detailing the three types of revision and the four-tier administrative hierarchy, a second body paragraph addressing challenges including exclusion errors and migration vectors, and a conclusion proposing continuous revision and digital public goods integration. Topic 7. Economic Infrastructure, IBC and NCLT. Systemic Audits, IBC and NCLT delays. Now, let us transition to economic infrastructure and banking. High-level evaluations of the National Company Law Tribunal have highlighted prolonged resolution timelines and the steep banking haircuts absorbed during corporate insolvencies. The NCLT is the specialized tribunal that adjudicates insolvency cases under the IBC framework. An efficient, predictable insolvency framework is vital to free up locked capital, resolve the legacy twin balance sheet crisis, and lower capital costs across the broader economy. When stressed assets are quickly resolved, capital is freed for productive uses and the banking system remains healthy. The IBC was designed to replace fragmented, outdated civil debt collection mechanisms with a single, market-driven, and time-bound corporate reorganization law. This was a fundamental reform of India's bankruptcy and insolvency regime, replacing multiple old laws with a unified framework. For prelims, remember the IBC was enacted in 2016 and the NCLT was established under the Companies Act 2013 to adjudicate corporate insolvency cases. The IBC is the regulator for insolvency professionals and the overall IBC framework. The creditor-in-control revolution. The statutory architecture of the IBC represents a fundamental shift to a creditor-in-control paradigm. It replaces older laws like CETA or SARFAESI, where defaulting promoters could lock up factories in endless courts while retaining asset control. Under the IBC, defaults immediately strip promoters of control, fundamentally changing the balance of power in distressed asset situations. The process is driven by the Committee of Creditors, formed by financial lenders who hold ultimate decision-making power over the company's survival strategy or liquidation. The COSI represents a collective decision-making body that prioritizes creditor interests. To manage the transition, the NCLT appoints insolvency professionals, who are licensed, independent corporate experts that take over corporate operations immediately to ensure assets do not deteriorate during the resolution process. IPs play a critical role in preserving asset value. For mains, the creditor-in-control paradigm represents a fundamental shift in Indian corporate governance. You can connect this to broader themes of creditor rights, promoter accountability, and the resolution of the twin balance sheet problem involving banks and corporates. The resolution timeline and legal shield. Let us understand the procedural timeline. The corporate insolvency resolution process is initiated by financial creditors, operational creditors, or corporate debtors upon verified default. Section 14 mandates an immediate moratorium on asset transfers, parallel lawsuits, and encumbrances, providing the legal shield for the resolution process. The Committee of Creditors is constituted immediately after admission to represent financial lenders. The legal moratorium gives lenders essential room to evaluate asset structures and formulate restructuring options. The strict timeline is a 180-day standard window, allowing a single 90-day extension, with an absolute cap of 330 days incorporating all legal delays. Passing the resolution plan requires a minimum 66% supermajority vote by COSI value. For prelims, remember the timeline. 180 plus 90 plus 90 extensions is equal to 330 days outer ceiling and a 66% COSI voting threshold. Section 14 moratorium and the 330-day ceiling are frequently tested facts. IBC bottlenecks, vacancies, and value destruction. Despite its statutory design, the IBC faces severe systemic friction points. Extended resolution delays trigger rapid value destruction, causing steep haircuts, devaluing plant machinery and brand equity, and frequently forcing banks to recover less than 20% of the original loan value. The real-world average for NCLT corporate resolutions has slipped to over 600 days, vastly exceeding the legal statutory ceiling of 330 days. This timeline drift is a major concern as it undermines the time-bound nature of the IBC. An ongoing shortage of judicial and technical members across NCLT benches leads to significant backlogs in both admitting cases and approving final resolution plans. The vacancy crisis is a key bottleneck. Under the statutory repayment hierarchy, operational creditors like small suppliers sit near the bottom, often recovering close to zero. The Section 53 waterfall mechanism prioritizes financial creditors, leaving operational creditors with limited recovery. For mains, the 600-plus day average versus the 330-day ceiling and the less than 20% recovery rate are powerful statistics demonstrating the implementation gaps. The operational creditor disadvantage is a fairness concern. Reforms to enhance IBC efficiency. The way forward requires multiple reforms. Judicial capacity scale-up is the first priority. The government must immediately fill all judicial vacancies across NCLT benches and establish specialized pre-admission courts to handle preliminary filings efficiently. This addresses the most critical bottleneck in the system. UNCITRAL cross-border insolvency implementation is the second priority. Integrating the UNCITRAL model law into the IBC will empower Indian banks to track and liquidate defaulting promoters' global assets. Cross-border coordination is essential in an era of globalized business operations. Corporate prepack expansion is the third priority. Broadening the prepackaged insolvency resolution process model to include larger corporate entities allows out-of-court restructuring agreements requiring only fast-track NCLT approval, significantly reducing tribunal burdens. For mains, these three reforms address capacity, cross-border coordination, and alternative resolution mechanisms. You can frame the prepacks approach as a way to reduce burden on formal courts while achieving faster outcomes for viable businesses. UPSC Focus, IBB Mandate, Section 29A and the Waterfall Mechanism. Let us consolidate this topic with high-yield prelims pointers. Understand the statutory role of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which regulates insolvency professionals, information utilities, and the overall functioning of the IBC ecosystem. Understand Section 29 of the IBC, which specifies who is barred from bidding for stressed assets, including undischarged insolvents, willful defaulters, and connected persons of the corporate debtor. Memorize the exact order of priority under the Section 53 waterfall mechanism. First, insolvency resolution process costs. Second, secured creditors and workmen's dues. Third, employee wages. Fourth, financial debts. And last, operational debts and government dues. For mains, a model question asks you to critically analyze the institutional bottlenecks within the NCLT framework and suggest structural remedies. The answer should include an introduction defining the IBC's objective and the creditor-in control paradigm, a first body paragraph detailing the timeline and waterfall mechanism, a second body paragraph analyzing bottlenecks including 600-plus day delays and less than 20% recovery, and a conclusion proposing judicial capacity scale-up, UNCITRAL implementation, and prepack expansion. Topic 8. Public Finance and Tax Policy. Double-digit direct tax growth. Now, let us turn to public finance and tax policy. Recent data from the Central Board of Direct Taxes highlights a strong, double-digit growth path in gross direct tax collections. This robust revenue provides a vital fiscal consolidation cushion, allowing the union government to meet strict fiscal deficit targets without cutting capital expenditures. This growth acts as a compliance catalyst, driven heavily by deep data integration, automated data matching with GST networks, and expanding formalization across corporate supply lines. The technology-enabled compliance improvements are a significant factor in revenue growth. For UPSC preparation, this topic is crucial for government budgeting, fiscal policy, public revenue mobilization, and broader macroeconomic indicators. It sits in GS Paper 3 under Indian Economy. Progressive versus regressive taxation. Understanding the distinction between direct and indirect taxation is fundamental. Direct taxation is levied directly on income or profits. Primary instruments include corporation tax and personal income tax. The equity impact is highly progressive. Higher income brackets face higher tax rates, which actively reduces economic inequality. Indirect taxation is levied on consumption of goods and services. It encompasses GST, customs duties, and excise levies. The equity impact is inherently regressive. All households pay the exact same tax rate on essential commodities, placing a heavier burden on lower-income segments. The macro-equity goal is achieving a higher ratio of direct to indirect taxes to maintain social equity and minimize the tax burden on vulnerable populations. The base challenge is that despite rising corporate tax collections, India's overall tax-to-GDP ratio remains low compared to developed OECD nations, severely constrained by a narrow individual income tax base. For mains, the progressive versus regressive distinction is crucial for understanding fiscal policy impacts on inequality. The tax-to-GDP ratio comparison with OECD nations provides important context for evaluating India's tax system. The macro tax buoyancy formulation. Understanding macroeconomic trends requires defining tax buoyancy. It is an essential indicator that measures the efficiency of tax collection growth relative to changes in nominal gross domestic product. The formula is tax buoyancy is equal to percentage change in tax revenue divided by percentage change in nominal GDP. A tax buoyancy score greater than 1 shows that tax revenues are expanding faster than the underlying economy, which reflects improved compliance and reduced tax evasion. This is desirable as it means the government can fund growing expenditures without raising tax rates. Strong non-debt revenues fundamentally alter the fiscal deficit equation. They lower the state's reliance on open market bond issuances, thereby preventing the crowding out of private corporate credit and helping to keep inflation steady. For prelims, remember the tax buoyancy formula. Buoyancy greater than 1 is positive. The difference between buoyancy and elasticity is that elasticity excludes discretionary tax changes while buoyancy includes them. Tech infrastructure in compliance. Now, let us address systemic gaps and conundrums in tax compliance. The cash economy leakage is a significant compliance gap due to a large cash economy across rural retail, real estate, and unorganized sectors, which obscures the true income profile of high-net-worth individuals. When transactions occur in cash, they leave no digital trail that can be tracked or taxed. The corporate tax conundrum is equally important. The 2019 reduction in corporate tax rates to 22% aimed to spark an immediate cycle of private sector capital expenditure, yet private investment has lagged behind expectations. This raises questions about whether tax cuts alone are sufficient to stimulate private investment. On the tech-enabled solutions side, the annual information statement provides a comprehensive portal with a real-time record of all high-value financial transactions, including shares, properties, and large deposits, reducing underreporting. The faceless assessment scheme randomly assigns tax audits via central servers, removing local human interface to curb rent-seeking behaviors and ensure transparent evaluation. For mains, you can connect these to the broader theme of technology-enabled governance and the challenges of formalizing the Indian economy. Way forward: fiscal reforms. Let us examine the way forward. Tax base expansion requires progressively phasing out complex tax exemptions, simplifying filing rules for individual filers, and bringing higher-earning unorganized commercial players into digital tax networks. The goal is to widen the tax net rather than increase rates on existing taxpayers. An appeals panel and dispute resolution acceleration are critical. The government should scale up the use of joint commissioner appeals panels and introduce automated mediation mechanisms to unlock billions in revenue currently stalled in tax tribunals. The pendency in tax disputes represents both delayed revenue and uncertainty for taxpayers. Tax slab rationalization will streamline personal income tax brackets for middle-income earners, maximizing disposable income, which in turn boosts consumer demand and domestic financial savings. Well-designed tax slabs can support both revenue generation and economic growth. For mains, these three reforms address base expansion, dispute resolution, and slab design. You can frame tax policy as a balance between revenue mobilization, economic growth, and equity considerations. UPSC Focus Tax Buoyancy, Constitutional Revenue Provisions. Let us consolidate this topic with high-yield prelims pointers. Understand the difference between tax buoyancy and tax elasticity. Buoyancy measures tax revenue growth with GDP including discretionary tax changes, while elasticity measures growth excluding changes. This distinction matters for analyzing whether revenue growth is automatic or policy-driven. Understand the constitutional basis. Article 265 establishes that no tax shall be levied or collected except by authority of law. Article 270 deals with the distribution of revenues between the Union and states. Article 280 establishes the statutory role of the Finance Commission, which recommends the formula for revenue sharing. Understand the structural classification difference between capital and revenue receipts. Capital receipts alter liabilities or assets, like borrowings or disinvestment, whereas revenue receipts do not create liability, like taxes and dividends. This distinction is fundamental for fiscal analysis. For mains, a model question asks you to evaluate recent direct tax collection trends and their impact on India's macroeconomic stability. The answer should include an introduction defining direct tax buoyancy and the tax to GDP challenge, a first body paragraph detailing the progressive versus regressive taxation distinction, a second body paragraph analyzing tech-enabled compliance and the corporate tax conundrum, and a conclusion advocating for tax base expansion and rationalization to support sustainable fiscal consolidation. Topic 9. Himalayan Disaster Management. Arunachal Pradesh Flash Floods and Emergency Operations. Now, let us address a topic with direct implications for mountain region disaster management. Severe cloudbursts triggered catastrophic flash floods in Arunachal Pradesh, necessitating joint emergency operations. Cloudbursts are localized extreme precipitation events that can cause devastating floods in mountainous terrain. The disaster event saw severe monsoonal cloudbursts causing catastrophic flash floods and landslides across 26 districts of Arunachal Pradesh. The impact footprint affected over 94,200 residents in 333 villages, damaging critical infrastructure, including bridges and telecom towers, and hundreds of hectares of crops. Joint rescue operations were launched by the NDRF, Indian Army engineering units, and local SDRF to establish tactical relief networks. This multi-agency coordination demonstrates the comprehensive disaster response framework. For UPSC preparation, this topic maps to GS Paper I, Geophysics, and GS Paper 3, Disaster Management. The cloudburst phenomenon and mountain flood dynamics are key geographical concepts. Himalayan flash flood drivers. Himalayan flash floods are driven by three categories of factors. Natural and geomorphological vulnerability includes the seismic activity of the Himalayas, which are fold mountains with loose rock and steep gradients. Cloudbursts involve localized precipitation exceeding 100 mm per hour that overwhelms mountain streams. Glacial lake outburst floods result from accelerated melt forming unstable high-altitude lakes prone to sudden failure. Anthropogenic accelerators include unregulated hill cutting for linear infrastructure without retaining walls, which alters slope dynamics. This combination of natural vulnerability and human activity creates perfect conditions for catastrophic flash floods. For mains, the intersection of climate change, glacial dynamics, and infrastructure development in fragile mountain ecosystems is a high-priority topic. GLOFs are particularly important given the accelerating glacial melt in the Himalayas. The Disaster Management Act of 2005. The Disaster Management Act of 2005 shifted India to a proactive framework led by the NDMA and SDMAs. At the national level, the National Disaster Management Authority serves as the apex policy institution chaired by the Prime Minister. This provides the highest political commitment to disaster governance. At the state level, state disaster management authorities, chaired by chief ministers, direct regional operations and mitigation funds. This state-level structure ensures that disaster management is tailored to local conditions. At the tactical level, the NDRF, a multi-battalion force, responds alongside local SDRF units and district administrations. The NDRF is the specialized response force trained for various disaster scenarios. For prelims, remember the DANE Act 2005, NDMA chaired by the PM, and NDRF as the specialized response force. The three-tier structure of national, state, and tactical levels is essential. Early warning and mitigation. Effective mitigation requires advanced early warning systems, glacial monitoring, and bioengineering for slope stabilization. Early warning systems involve scaling up Doppler weather radars in the northeast to track convective cloud cells. These radars provide real-time data on storm development and movement. Glacial monitoring utilizes high-resolution ISRO satellite imagery and automated water-level sensors for high-altitude lakes. This allows early detection of potentially dangerous lake formations that could lead to GLOFs. Hazard mapping develops macro-level community zonation maps to restrict construction on unstable slopes. This proactive approach prevents exposure of vulnerable populations to known hazards. Slope stabilization mandates bioengineering, rock bolting, and advanced drainage for mountain road projects. These engineering solutions reduce the risk of slope failure during heavy rainfall events. For mains, this multi-layered approach demonstrates the integration of technology, science, and engineering in disaster risk reduction. Future resilience. Future resilience demands ecological carrying capacity audits, eco-sensitive infrastructure, and community-led response teams. Scientific audits mandate comprehensive ecological carrying capacity assessments and enforce building codes in Himalayan urban centers. This ensures that construction does not exceed the environmental limits of the terrain. Eco-sensitive infrastructure transitions from heavy blast hand-cut road expansion to lower-impact tunnel designs and biotaining structures. Modern engineering can create mountain roads that work with the terrain rather than against it. Community-led response strengthens local resilience by training village-level task forces, such as the Aapda Mitra scheme, in rescue and first aid. Local community capacity is often the first line of defense in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. For mains, the Aapda Mitra scheme is a key initiative you should know about. The community-led approach represents best practices in disaster risk reduction globally. UPSC Focus Disaster Management in the Himalayas. Let us consolidate this topic with prelims focus areas. Study the atmospheric physics of cloudbursts, which involves understanding how localized convective activity can produce extreme precipitation over small areas in short time periods. Understand the 7 targets of the Sendai framework, 2015 to 2030 for disaster risk reduction, which provides the global framework that India follows. Know the statutory funding of disaster response funds at national and state levels. For mains, a model question asks you to critically analyze the governance gaps in current mountain disaster management strategies. The answer should include an introduction referencing the Arunachal Pradesh floods and the 94,200 affected residents, a first body paragraph analyzing the Himalayan flash flood drivers, including natural vulnerability and anthropogenic accelerators. A second body paragraph evaluating the institutional framework under the DAME Act 2005, and a conclusion proposing scientific audits, eco-sensitive infrastructure, and community-led response. Topic 10. NEP 2020 and Textbook Governance. NEP 2020 and School Textbook Governance. Now, let us address our final topic on education governance. Friction between central and state authorities highlights the complexities of aligning local curricula with NEP 2020. This academic conflict is fundamental to understanding federalism in education. A former SCERT director was arrested over printing errors and unauthorized textbook content changes, highlighting the accountability dimension of textbook governance. States argue that uniform curriculum frameworks could dilute regional history and linguistic diversity, representing the federal debate dimension. For UPSC preparation, this topic maps to GS paper 2 under Social Sector Education and Federalism issues. The tension between national standards and regional autonomy is a recurring theme in Indian governance. NEP 2020 Pedagogical Restructuring. The NEP 2020 proposes a fundamental restructuring of school education into 4 stages. The foundational stage covers 5 years for ages 3 to 8, focusing on play-based learning, emphasizing early physical and cognitive growth. The preparatory stage covers 3 years for ages 8 to 11, transitioning to structured classroom learning and basic textbook concepts. The middle stage covers 3 years for ages 11 to 14, featuring subject-oriented experiential learning in sciences, humanities, and mathematics. The secondary stage covers 4 years for ages 14 to 18, with multidisciplinary study offering greater critical depth and flexibility. The linguistic policy recommends instruction in mother tongue or regional languages as the primary medium of instruction until class 5, supporting a flexible 3-language formula that balances national integration with regional identity. For prelims, remember the 5+3+3+4 structure: 5 years foundational, 3 years preparatory, 3 years middle, and 4 years secondary. The mother tongue policy until class 5 and the 3-language formula are key components. Concurrent balance in education governance. Education governance relies on a concurrent balance between national frameworks and state adaptations. The National Council of Educational Research and Training formulates the national curriculum framework to set broad national syllabi benchmarks. Education is on the concurrent list, requiring collaboration between Parliament and state assemblies. State Council of Educational Research and Training institutes adapt the national framework to produce textbooks reflecting regional histories. This state-level adaptation is where federalism operates in practice. Administrative accountability is critical because systemic oversight failures in textbook compilation can attract legal penalties under public service laws. The arrest of a former SCERT director demonstrates that accountability extends to education administrators. For prelims, remember the concurrent list status of education. NCERT at the national level, SCERTs at the state level. This two-tier structure is essential for understanding education governance. Challenges in educational governance. Standardized central assessments and medium of instruction disputes pose significant challenges. Federal friction arises from concerns that standardized central assessments like Parakh and uniform textbooks may reduce regional historical representation. States worry about losing their distinctive educational character. The language dispute is particularly contentious. The Supreme Court questioned classifying English as a non-native language given its long-standing administrative role. This challenges the NEP's emphasis on mother tongue instruction. Rote learning remains prevalent because state examination boards remain structurally orientated around memory retention rather than critical thinking. The NEP's emphasis on experiential learning requires fundamental changes in assessment patterns. Capacity deficit is a major challenge because over 9.5 million teachers urgently need professional training for experiential learning. The NEP cannot be implemented without significant investment in teacher capacity building. For mains, the 9.5 million teachers requiring training are a powerful statistic. The tension between standardization and diversity is a recurring theme in Indian federalism. Governing textbook reform. Improving textbook governance requires decentralized auditing, flexible language frameworks, and increased public funding. Decentralized auditing establishes independent academic review boards at state and district levels to verify textbook factual accuracy. This addresses the type of failure that led to the CERT director's arrest. Flexible multilingualism balances regional language proficiency with access to English for global economic integration. Neither extreme monolingualism nor extreme multilingualism serves student interests. Education funding targets raising public expenditure on education to a minimum of 6% of GDP to modernize infrastructure and enhance teacher training. This funding commitment is essential for translating NEP vision into ground-level reality. For mains, the 6% GDP target for education spending is a frequently tested fact. The current spending is around 4 to 5%, making this a significant gap that must be closed. UPSC Focus, NEP 2020 Constitutional Focus and Challenges. Let us consolidate this topic with UPSC Prelims key pointers. Study the constitutional mapping. Article 21A provides the right to education for children aged 6 to 14, inserted by the 86th Amendment. Article 45 directs the state to provide early childhood care. Article 350A provides for instruction in a mother tongue at the primary stage. The 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 transferred education to the concurrent list, enabling both Parliament and state legislatures to make laws. Review the institutional history of education commissions. The Central Advisory Board of Education coordinates between central and state governments on education policy. Historical commissions like the Radhakrishnan Commission of 1948 and the Kothari Commission of 1964 shaped Indian education policy. For mains, a model question asks you to analyze the institutional challenges surrounding curriculum governance and textbook accountability in India's federal structure. The answer should include an introduction defining the NEP 2020 framework and the concurrent list status of education, a first body paragraph detailing the NCERT-CERT relationship, a second body paragraph analyzing challenges including federal friction and language disputes, and a conclusion proposing decentralized auditing and increased funding. My dear students, we have completed an extraordinary comprehensive analysis covering 10 major topics spanning the entire UPSC syllabus. Let us consolidate the key takeaways from each segment. From the India-UK CETA topic, remember the 90% tariff elimination, the 10 to 12% cost savings from DCC, and the 2x trade target by 2030. The gold standard bilateral treaty designation and the protection of generic medicine flexibilities are critical features. From the Iran-US conflict and Hormuz crisis, remember the 21% global petroleum flow through the Strait, the 9.5-day SPR buffer, and the 8.5 million diaspora in the GCC region. The 39 kilometers narrowest width and the 85% Chinese rare earth processing monopoly are powerful statistics. From access to justice and judicial reforms, remember the 50 million pending cases, the 30% vacancy rate, the 77%